welcome to our podcast, Gentle Answers, a podcast of redeeming conversations. I'm your host today, Jojo Ruba, and we're really glad to have John Hilton-O'Brien from Parents for Choice in Education as our guest today. I thought, start of the school year, it's great to connect with John and see what they're up to, especially commenting on legislation that was passed last December. As you know, we joined several Alberta-based groups to start Parents and Kids Together as an event to support legislation that the government here in Alberta was passing, protecting kids from gender confusion and the enforcement of gender ideology. And these three pieces of legislation were very helpful. We'll talk about that. One of these pieces of legislation is now in court. And I wanted to see where John can give us advice or even just give us a little bit of telling us what's going on in that situation. Because maybe, John, you could start off with by telling us a little more about Parents for Choice in Education. Give us your website, and then we'll talk about these pieces of legislation.
So Parents for Choice in Education is found at www.parentchoice.ca. It's important that you say parent, not parents, because otherwise you get sent to a baby food website, apparently.
Okay, thanks for that, John. I appreciate that.
So Parents for Choice in Education has been around for 13 years now. We're arguably the oldest and most successful of the parental rights organizations in North America, with multiple legislative wins to our credit. And our whole deal is that we want to ensure the best education possible through maximum parental choice. And everything we do is dedicated to that aim.
And isn't it fair to say, public education is supposed to be a partner or even a servant to parents. They're supposed to be there to complement parents, not to take over what parents are doing.
Correct.
So when you think about parental rights, especially in light of our kids and the kids going back to school, one of the biggest concerns we've raised, and here in Alberta, all kinds of places all over the world now, is this ideology that tells kids they can change their gender without their parents knowing what's going on. Well, what's PCE's position on that?
The job of the teacher is to act in loco parentis, as they say in the old language. That is, in the place of the parents, which really means as the agent of the parents. Mm-hmm. And of late, some organizations, such as the Alberta Teachers Association, have been putting it out that no, teachers actually act in parens patriae, mm-hmm. in the parental role of the state, right, or as agents of the state. And that's really the way that they're supposed to interact with kids. Right. It's the same legal status that we accord to prison guards or the child welfare worker who seizes children from a family. It doesn't really have great connotations, but it's used as an excuse to say that means that we can do what we like with your children and don't have to consult you.
Yeah, it really reverses the role, doesn't it? Rather than being this agent of the parents, they're now overriding the parents, especially when it comes to something as basic as a child's gender.
It does, and unfortunately it's led to a certain loss of trust that parents normally have for the education system.
If you think about totalitarian regimes all over the world, and historically, whether it's in North Korea or communist China or Cuba, that's where the problem lies, is when the government decides what children should learn and know and not respect the right of parents to pass on their beliefs, their values, and to be a partner, or like you said, a servant of the parents, not its controller.
But the real problem underlying this is, who is the government, right? Mm-hmm. Governments are socially constructed. Families are natural things, right?
Absolutely.
And when people are saying that the government should do it, what they mean is that they themselves should have power. And they're not talking about the crown necessarily. When we look at some sort of quango like Egal Canada, saying that they should have the right to decide who makes decisions, they're arrogating that power to themselves. Mm. It isn't even the government exactly. It's as if we're being ruled by a bunch of rather arbitrary aristocrats.
Well, Egal Canada is equality for gays and lesbians everywhere. They've been around since the 90s, and they have been pushing their social and moral positions on sexuality and gender in law, successfully so federally. And so now they have the hubris, and this is my personal opinion, of course, they have the hubris to think that they can dictate what you should be teaching your kids about gender identity. And ironically, their acronym is gays and lesbians, so bisexuals, transgenders, they're not included in that, but they've just added that into their group as they expand the concept of sexuality as an identity. And I think that is one of the biggest problems we have here is that we're actually telling kids they have to pigeonhole themselves into a sexual identity as young as kindergarten, grade 1 and 2. They have situations. They've talked about situations with kids as young as 6, 7, 8 who are transitioning and they don't even understand what it means to be a boy or a girl, let alone wanting to change into becoming a man or woman, someone of the opposite sex. So that background information, John, it's just flabbergasting that these groups are the ones dictating Alberta law. And EGAL is based in Toronto; it's not based here. With a lawsuit, and they've managed to find 5 transgender kids in a lawsuit. So before we get to that, though, if you could just let the audience know here. So Alberta passed 3 pieces of legislation in on December 5th. And it was due to great work by you guys and many other parents and organizations. Like I said, we organized parents and kids together. We had, I think, one of the best rallies on this issue on our side that we've had across Canada. And our friends actually from a different Christian group are organizing something similar in Toronto later this year. But tell us about the 3 pieces of legislation that were passed on December 5th.
So there was Bill 26, the Health Statutes Amendment Act, which bans hormone therapy for minors under 15 and gender affirming surgeries for those under 18. That one is currently facing a court challenge from Gale Canada and Skipping Stone Foundation. Then Bill 27, the Education Amendment Act, requires parental notification and consent for name and pronouns changes and opt-in consent for sex education. Gale Canada and Skipping Stone have confirmed their intent to pursue legal action, but I don't believe they've filed yet. Fairness and Safety in Sport Act, Bill 29, prohibits individuals not assigned female at birth from participating in female-only sports divisions. And again, advocacy groups, including Gale Canada and Skipping Stone Foundation, have announced their intent to sue over it.
And now, especially with the last 2, John, are you familiar with some of the polling that was done about how much Albertans support this legislation? Because it's pretty high, isn't it?
I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but at the time, public support was very high.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense that if you're an adult, most Albertans will say, well, yeah, you can choose to do what you want with your body, even though, frankly, the public, us, is still paying for it, paying for your gender transition. But when it comes to children, most adults, most Albertans understand you're not old enough to make these kinds of decisions when it comes to your bedtime or even what kind of clothes you can wear. So how can you make a decision that your gender identity is all of that, the opposites at that kind of age? And I think too with parental rights, and again, you're the expert on this, John. There's a lot of support in Alberta to protect the right of parents to know if their child wants to change their pronouns or change their gender identity at school, because there has been situations where parents are kept in the dark when their children are living as the opposite gender. In California, for example, they passed legislation where they actually have closets where kids can change into to look like the opposite gender without their parents even knowing this. And there was one situation we interviewed of a young lady who almost committed suicide because she was living as a boy. And this is in Calgary. She was living as a boy at school, and her parents had no idea back home.
Well, PCE is part of a lawsuit in Saskatchewan that's been going on, in which the Saskatchewan government decided to ban secret pronoun changes in school. And we found that there was some interesting things going there. And if you look up our lawsuit, you will find that there are affidavits from people who have been terribly affected by this, not just one or two, but several. And those are just the people who are willing to speak up.
Right.
But outfits like Yale don't care about that because their funding doesn't come from parents and it doesn't come from Alberta or Saskatchewan. And in fact, some of these groups seem to have more money than God, literally, possibly. When we sent our lawyer to intervene in the Saskatchewan case, we were sharing him with another organization. And when he got there, he found that there were two lawyers there for the government, and the LGBTQ plus group had sent 14.
Wow.
The judge actually referred to it as an army.
Wow.
And when you look at the numbers, you'll discover why.
Yeah.
You see, Yale Canada receives money from various federal government departments, right? You can find this in the Open Government portal for Canada. Health Canada gave them $260,000 and change for projects between April 2025 and March 2027. Women and Gender Equality Canada gave them $150,000 for the Pride 7 Summit 2025 project, over $1 million between 2025 and 2027 for addressing anti-2S LGBTQI hate through Rainbow Action. Veterans Affairs has a current grant for $350,000. Public Safety Canada has $2.65 million out to them for a grant for research on domestic violence among 2S LGBTQI populations. I don't expect to see results from that given out publicly. There's $1.2 million from Housing Infrastructure and Communities. There's smaller allocations through Canada Summer Jobs and the Victims Fund. But a snapshot of funding just for fiscal year 2023 showed government funding accounted for $4.2 million, which is about 2/3 of Yale's total revenue. If you look at Wikipedia, the Yale Canada article talks about a wide array of corporations, foundations, and other organizations. This is a behemoth, and it's funded by your tax dollars. It's funded by the federal government, so it really doesn't need to care about you. But most importantly, they need to produce results according to the grants. They need to show that there is discrimination against people from sexual and gender minorities, and they need to show that they're addressing hate. Well, to address hate, they need to claim that there is hate for people from sexual and gender minorities. Right. And that's part of the reason why some of the outrage seems manufactured.
Right.
People have good reason for wanting to manufacture it.
Yeah.
You can't be surprised about that.
I love that word manufacturer because that's what the left actually is told to do in terms of manufacturing consent. I think Noam Chomsky talks a lot about that. He's a leftist thinker. But also, and what's important to point out is that Egales is one organization that's on this lawsuit. There are other LGBTQ organizations that are getting millions of dollars as well that are promoting this kind of ideology to say disagreement with or promotion of the idea that parents can say no to a child's transition is hate, is going to cause problems. And in fact, there's been a lawsuit where a judge has already ruled using their language. So maybe we can talk about the law that's stalled, because the other two have been implemented because it's already law. Girls have a right to participate in girls-only sports, and parents have a right to know if they're teaching sexual content. to their children at the school, including gender transitions. But the law about preventing 15 and under kids from transitioning, that has been on hold because of this lawsuit. So maybe, John, tell us a little more about that.
Well, PCE doesn't really have a direct stake in the law.
Mhm.
Our point of contact came 2 or 3 years ago when we discovered an internal memo from Alberta Health Services that told us that the AHS was telling teachers and school staff that they would accept referrals to
Mhm.
the pediatric gender services clinic
Mhm.
without requiring that parents be informed.
Wow.
So we wrote about that. We brought it to the attention of the then education minister, who's now health minister. And as health minister, she decided to take some action about it.
Good. Good. And so this whole idea that children should not be transitioning before 15 at least, I mean, I think it should be 18, um, is something that's actually being it's becoming common sense in all places in the United States, all kinds of states, but also in places like Europe, like the UK and Sweden, where they've been experiencing and experimenting on these kinds of practices for quite a while, and they've seen immense damage to children and have put out reports, including the CAS report out of the UK, which really talked about how there is no medical reason to transition children. Like it was quite clear, and the cost of transitioning children to those children's lives and to their choices later on as adults is really, the ramifications are huge because you're sterilizing yourself, you're damaging your body, you're putting yourself on hormone therapy for the rest of your life. And as a 15-year-old, as a 13-year-old, you don't know this. You don't understand what it means to never have children at that age, because you're not thinking about that. You're only thinking about your immediate needs, and parents have to be involved. And we've talked to people here where they say the parents themselves feel intimidated by the medical community, saying if you don't allow transitioning, your child will die. So there's a lot of pressure. So I love this piece of legislation. So John, tell us a little bit about what's been happening with this lawsuit, though.
Um, on June 27th, the Court of King's Bench in Alberta granted an injunction temporarily blocking the enforcement of the ban on gender affirming care for minors. And there is a bit of irony in the timing because it's very, very close on to some recent actions in the States,
Mhm.
right? Where recently the American Supreme Court made a ruling on a case, I think it's Skirmetti, that's really quite similar. And ultimately, Canadian courts do pay attention to the rulings of international courts and often find the reasoning of those courts to be persuasive,
Right.
right? And there are echoes back and forth between the two legal systems,
And
right? So
and
so
those,
we need to pay attention to those cases.
right, and those cases were quite positive in terms of protecting children and parents, right?
Very much so, yes.
So having that kind of precedent in the US as well as in Europe now. So it's not just right-wing Republican conservatives that the liberal left here in Canada hate. It's actually reasonably minded people. And I'm not saying Republicans are reasonably minded people, but I'm just saying even in their own circles, people are saying, wait a second. How is a 5, 7, 9-year-old capable of understanding what the huge ramifications of hormone therapy are, or even the puberty blockers that they claimed had no impact on children? They're now saying, well, the CAS report said, no, we don't know. We can't experiment on children, especially when those are actually used to sterilize convicts who are convicted of sexual crimes. So why would we give that to children? So, John, what's going to happen next with this lawsuit? Because there was a ruling already, right? There's an appeal the government is making against this temporary injunction.
Well, the problem with lawsuits is you can never guess which way a judge is going to rule. and
Right.
it's a fool's errand to try. There is no way of knowing what's going to come out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, part of the problem here is that expert witnesses are expensive, right? They cost $1,000 a day.
Right.
So that's why groups like mine are at a terrible disadvantage in lawsuits. And so, honestly, is the government that doesn't have infinite resources to throw away on these things. Since judges don't have a crystal ball, they can't see what will happen in the future, and they're not experts on developmental psychology or psychotherapy, they're obliged to rely in many of these cases on, well, expert witnesses. And groups like eGale will just throw money at it. They'll produce expert witness after expert witness. What the Cass review showed was that all of the evidence being presented, all of the arguments in favor of affirming care,
Mm-hmm.
are bogus.
Mm-hmm.
The research is of such low quality that you should not pay attention to it. That's what the Cass review told us.
Right.
And, we look over at the United States and we see the American Psychological Association had a task force talking about the impact of sexualized material on children,
Mm-hmm.
being a highly negative impact on their lives. And this was repeated by a recent Alberta study back in 2023, done independently by U of C. There's real harm to children.
Mm-hmm.
But groups like eGale Canada have 4.2 million reasons not to care about the quality of the research. They're getting grant money to pretend that they're on the right track.
Mm-hmm.
They'll lose their jobs if they admit they're not.
Yeah.
So what are they going to do? Well, they're going to sue the government, and they're going to make the best case they can that they're right, regardless of how much the real evidence is stacked against them.
Mm-hmm.
And because courts are a pay-to-play system, they may get their way.
Yeah. Yeah. It really does provide a sobering view of the legal system in Canada, doesn't it? In terms of the hope for change that we'd like to see. But in this case, the Alberta government has said that they're willing to use the notwithstanding clause, even if they were to lose in court, which is an amazing, a powerful statement about how not only how important this is, but how much support this legislation has in Alberta, that they don't see it as a risk to stand up despite all the liberal media. And I use the word liberal in this the small L sense, in the sense of people who think the government should run the show and have the source of objective morality, whatever they think is right, especially on issues like this, where ultimately it's our emotional and it's our feelings that are prioritized over facts. And I think that's a dangerous precedent that we have. So, John, maybe just as we wrap up here, tell us a little more about what parents can do as they start the school year with their kids, and maybe a little bit about what PCE is going to be doing this fall.
Well, as a parent, it's not a bad idea to see if you can tour the child's classroom.
Mm-hmm.
Have a look at the resources that are kept on the shelves and maybe ask a few questions about them. Just see what's going on. If you don't like a particular classroom, for instance, you have grave concerns about the English teacher, it is actually possible for you to do homeschooling on one or two subjects alone, and the school board handles the rest.
Great.
Or to have a couple of courses done by distance education through some other authority. You do have the ability to pick and choose a little bit here.
That's great.
So that's something worth talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the things that's coming up this fall is we're going to have the school board elections.
Mm-hmm.
Parents for Choice in Education has been training people in how to run for school board and how to help other people run for school board, which is arguably more important.
For sure.
After all, some people are running from office while others are running for office.
I like that. I like that.
So we are putting together a systematic survey of school board trustees And ultimately, you should be able to get a good sense of people from whether they answered our survey at all and from how they answered the survey. And that will help you to elect better school boards in general, ones that are more focused on education rather than inflicting ideology.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's great. And you can find that the survey results eventually on your website. If you could just remind us again where that is.
At www.parentchoice.ca.
Perfect. Without the S, parentchoice.ca.
That's right.
I would be negligent if I didn't ask this question, actually. But when you're talking to your teachers or when you're talking to the candidates, what are the key questions you should ask in conversation? Because we are a conversation ministry, redeeming conversations, John, and I think it's important for us to use the power of conversation when meeting with these people. So, what tips would you give for those conversations?
Well, you might start by asking what they think consent involves.
Mhm.
That's important.
That's a good one. Yep.
And you might ask how they prefer to be contacted, because you're going to need to talk to that teacher.
Mhm.
But in the end, as a parent, one of the jobs you're going to have is you're going to need to advocate for your child at some point, more than likely. And all advocacy is going to begin with a relationship. And you want to have a good relationship with the person you're advocating to, because if you don't, it's much harder to be successful. So when you meet that child's teacher for the first time, I suggest that you find a reason to like her. And you make sure that your first contacts aren't complaints. So you can build a solid relationship, which will allow you to advocate when you need to.
That's great. Yeah, and that's part and parcel of what we teach as well. You want to find common ground. And one of the first things you want to do is be able to learn their names and they can learn your names. I think that's great advice, John. So last question, anything else you'd like to add? Any other piece of advice?
No, I think that's it. It will be all sorts of fun as the school year gets underway. There's merry chaos with everything that's going on,
Yes, for sure.
and we will see how this plays out.
Well, and for those of us who pray, I think there's a lot to pray about over the school year for our government, both our provincial and federal, and even in municipal, because the municipal election is happening alongside the school board one as well, right, John, all across Alberta.
That's correct.
So we have a lot to pray for. And pray for our friends at Parents for Choice and Education as well. They do great work here in Alberta, John. It's been great to chat with you. I'm really happy that you're doing your work here. And I can truly say that Alberta has the one of the best educational systems for parental choice in the continent because of groups like yours, particularly your group. So thank you so much.